Bold Journey, your television passport to the exciting, colorful world of adventure.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. In the high Himalayas of Tibet, money has little value. As they did in ancient days, the Tibetans survived by the system of barter. They trade salt for sugar, sugar for wool, wool for grain, in the same way that a youngster in America might trade baseball cards for a yo-yo. Tonight we present the actual films of Dr. Michael Hagopian, who joined and lived with one of the Tibetan trading tribes for almost 4 months. This journey takes us into the giant Himalayas to trade in the uplands. Dr. Hagopian's film is entitled Caravan to Kneeling. Before we join the caravan into Tibet, it's my pleasure to welcome to our program the man who experienced and photographed this colorful adventure, Dr. Michael Hagopian. How are you this evening, Doctor?
Fine, thank you.
Please sit down, will you? Let's get to know you a little better. Now, we've been fortunate enough to have about half a dozen doctors in our program at one time or another. Now, I'd like to know, what does the title doctor refer to in your case?
John, it refers to a Ph.D. in political science from Harvard University.
Oh, I see. I thought I might be able to get a little free medical advice after the show.
I'm afraid not.
Now, first of all, what were you doing in Tibet, and how did you get there?
I was there during the war at the CBI Theater. Liked the region, so I thought I'd go back, and I wrote letters to a good many universities in India. Finally secured a job at the Banaras Hindu University. While I was there, I heard about mountain people who bartered on the top of the world. Thought it would be a great adventure, so I headed out that way.
Well, how interesting it was, we'll soon see. But for our friends at home, Doctor, could you pinpoint the actual starting point of our caravan?
Yes, of course. I would say it's in the mid-parts of the Himalayas, directly north of New Delhi, the capital of India. That would put it about halfway mark between Kashmir and Burma.
And what's the actual starting altitude?
About 4,000 feet.
Well, when one thinks of Tibet, one instinctively thinks of the Himalayas and the monsoons. Now, why do the monsoons present such an obstacle to travelers?
Well, John, these monsoons are tremendous clouds that come in from Southeast Asia, bounce against the Himalayas, and then precipitate their waters down into India. They cover the mountains with snow, and then the torrential streams are let loose down the plains. And during this season, of course, all expeditions, movement, trade is stopped in the Himalayas. It's a combination, as you see here, of water, wind, and storm. And so during this season, I was marooned at the foot of the Himalayas in this village. And near here at the village of Kalimpong, I saw a site that was very memorable. It might have been a trading center in the days of Genghis Khan. These people come with all of their horses and belongings, and they trade, barter, and move on. Once the monsoons are over, then the expeditions begin. Some of the large scientific expeditions start out with elephants. Then there are others that have pack animals, caravans that go into Tibet. Now, my expedition consisted of one lonely coolie and even a lonelier Hagopian, and my jackknife. That figures in the story, John, later on. As we moved up, we were in search of a trader village. I had heard about that these traders bartered, so I finally arrived at their first village at the elevation of 9,000 feet high in the central part of the Himalayas, and I found out that these people were Buddhists. Actually, they tended to change their religion as they went from altitude to altitude. At lower altitude, they brought out their Hindu gods as well as their Buddhist gods. They provided a home for me near the edge of a river, and while I was improving the value of this real estate, I secured a remarkable insight into their life, into their culture, and these people who trade at the highest bartering village in the world. What surprised me from the very first was that a mailman came through the village. The post office was right outside what might be the Chamber of Commerce building. The business community wasn't too gracious to this postmaster because he read all the letters and checked up and even corrected them. I know, John, because I'd send a letter through and referred to the postmaster as the good Swami. He'd corrected it, referring to himself as the very good Swami, and passed the letter on.
So he's not only a postmaster, but an editor.
yes, and he could read English. This was one of the very few men in the Himalayas who could read and write. And now he erases and blots out his ledger, and the mail goes on. These people like to smoke the hookah, and I think this was the keystone of their society. They asked me if we had hookahs in America. And I said, no hookahs, but cigarettes. They said, poor country, and didn't want to come to America if there were no hookahs. They cleansed themselves, contrary to belief, not daily or weekly, but maybe once every 6 months, rub mustard oil in their hair. I was admiring these girls, so one of the chief traders made an offer. I can still hear his offer. Fine gal, big feet, low dowry, plus jackknife. I went investigating, found out she was 6 years old and had a running nose. There she is on the right, John.
Oh, my God. This was for the jackknife, eh?
Yeah. She's playing the Tibetan version of jacks. Her sister was doing the laundry this Monday morning in the Himalayas in a hollowed-out trunk of a tree. Note that knee action there. Some of our engineers must have copied it and incorporated in our automatic washing machines. Now, as I've mentioned to you, John, these people are traders. They have money, but they don't use money in their trade. They're going to take rice and sugar to the mountains and bring back salt and wool from northern Tibet. And there's the young girl with a nose ring as decoration, and she's also preparing the grain. And her father, likewise, carefully going through this grain, prepare the grain, winnow them, and sift them very carefully. They pack their saddlebags, 9 pounds on each side, and then they wait for the snows to melt. This is in the month of March and April. In May, they start to think about the high mountains. The snows are beginning to melt now, John, and the streams subside, and so they start into the high country. They let the goats out of the corral, and some of them have 200-300 goats. And the Lama, their priest, starts up on this journey with them. They're going to go up to a village at the elevation of 13,000 feet. That is their trading center. It is their home village as well. They leave behind their grandfather, old people, and the sick or the very small children. The Lama now and his son, little boy, his family, they also are en route to the top village. Each goat might have 18 pounds of weight on its back.
Now, what else but a goat could make this trip up these precipitous trails?
Goats are the most practical means of transportation, but yaks also make the journey. They go on these trails, John, narrow trails, incredible as it might seem. There are dangers lurking, washouts, bridges break down. There are, of course, snakes en route sometimes that tend to take off with a goat or two, but on the whole, they don't have much loss. Daily, of course, they stop. They travel 5 to 9 miles a day and keep this up for almost a month. They take good care of these goats because these are their trucks, the backbone of their economy. They unload them nightly and then take their goods and pile them up very neatly so that no moisture will come during the night. Now the goats have come in from the mountainsides and they're resting for the night. In the morning, once again, they'll start their journey. They have to travel some 250 miles in this way. So once again in the morning, they start out. And I'd gotten to know these people rather well. They're very curious people and intellectually alert, actually. They asked me lots of questions. For instance, as we went along these trails, they asked me whether my father had goats. I said, no. Do you have goats? I told them no. Well, they determined we were very poor people. Then they said, do you have more women or men in your country of America? I said, more women. They said, well, we can trade all right. Now, these bridges, they construct themselves. They're rather good engineers. Sometimes, of course, the waters are rather high, as you will see by the water line, and the bridges will break down and dozens of goats will pour down into the Indian Ocean. So after many weeks of traveling, I arrived with them to this village of Kneeling, the elevation of 13,000 feet. The mountains rise up to 26. This is their hometown, although they stay here for only 3 months of the year. It's situated in the bottom of a crater, extinct volcano. And now, the first of the traders is coming into this abandoned village. It's been covered by snow most of the year. The goats are coming in, and I was thinking while I was there that I was one of the very few Americans to spend the 4th of July weekend in the bottom of an extinct volcano. The people are coming in one by one. And now begins the big wait. They're going to wait in this village until northern traders arrive there from the other side of the mountain. John, the southern traders have now arrived at their top village of Kneeling, 13,000 feet. Very opportunistic people and very hard-working. So they lost no time. They start out by working and planting grain. They're going to reap a crop of wheat, summer wheat, during the 3 months that they're up here. The old men and the women and the children work in agriculture. The able-bodied people just engage in trade.
And this is why they took the yaks along.
That's right. The yaks come up for this purpose. Industrious people, and they really are hard-working throughout the year, even in agriculture. Now I realize when the chief trader offered me his daughter and mentioned about big feet, well, it's useful to have a wife that can go over the plot of land.
I see what you mean.
They irrigate this, and shortly they'll bring in the harvest, and they will place that harvest in a storehouse, very sturdy storehouse, until they start going down again. Even in Tibet, you need keys to unlock doors. People are rather trim up in these mountains, John. They're good walkers. In fact, a man's honor depends on how well he can walk. But this son-in-law of the trader was a rather joke in town because his mother-in-law had to rub his legs with yak butter. And when a mother-in-law can both out-talk and out-walk a fella, even Tibet's going to the dogs. Well, I was not only a curiosity there, John, but also a problem for a while. I'd ran out of food, Western food that I'd taken up. And so the head of the traders came and brought some rice and sugar. I asked to pay for it. He said, no, we don't want you to pay. He explained that if I paid, then he would have to sell to me again. But if he gave it as a gift, I couldn't ask for more. So I ate wheat cakes, powdered with sugar in the morning and salt at night for a couple of weeks. And I got pretty tired of this. So I said, what kind of vegetables do you have? Well, they said it's not good to eat. Now, I couldn't speak too well. In their language, they tried to explain that I shouldn't eat much. Well, I ate a whole bunch of vegetables. Clover leaves, actually like spinach, it turned out to be their most potent laxative. One touching sight, John, was of a young man bringing a plank of wood. This was the school teacher. And he was taking this wood from lower elevation up into the village of Kneeling so that they could have school. This was the other man who could read. There were 35 children in school. Only one of them was a girl. They did not believe that girls needed to be educated. Well, now, the little fellow, he's the youngest, came in late. They spread Himalayan soil, pulverize it on these slates that the teacher has cut from the wood that he's brought. And so they write on these slates by making paper with the soil and then getting a twig and writing.
He'd be in a bad way if he sneezed.
That's right. They had no homework, but they had examinations. He would ask 2 students to come up. The one who got the wrong answer was punished by the one who got the right answer. And so this fella on the right boxes the ears of the other boy. The month and a half has passed. The people stand and look out. Their whole life depends upon trade. So they send out scouts to the mountains, to the trails, to look for the northern traders who are to come from these passes, from the top of the mountains. If they don't come, the whole year's activity is wasted. Their income is nothing for that year. I moved ahead and caught up with some of the scouts who were standing up on the hills with the prayer flags flying over there. Prayers for the safe journey of the northern Tibetans. I finally found these northern Tibetans stranded by a stream. They had constructed bridges, but these fellows weren't much of engineers. They weren't as good as the southerners. And so these bridges were kind of wobbly and they'd cave in. Wood and rock and twig and slates.
And may I ask where these northern traders are coming from?
Yes, they are coming from, John, from areas near the borders of the Gobi Desert, from as far away as Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, from Gartok, Shingatz, various regions in northern Tibet. And the shrewd southern traders made these fellows walk almost twice as far to get to the village of Kneeling. These boys from the north brought sheep. The sheep have all the wool on them. They carry this product, the wool that they're going to trade, right on the backs of the sheep. Also, they bring salt from the salt mines of central Tibet. And finally, they meet in this village of Kneeling in the bottom of the crater, in the hometown of the southern traders, and the trading begins. As I've explained, these men do not exchange money. All they do is barter. You notice the two kinds of traders, the one on the right coming from northern Tibet, Mongolia, and the one on the left from the southerners. They bargain, they argue, but they never fight, and they settle all arguments by throwing dice. All the traders seem to have two sets of dice in different pockets, and they were looking for excuses to pull them out and throw them to see who would trade first and what the going rate of exchange was going to be. They have money in their pockets, but the money is not used for bartering. They just exchange rice against salt, salt against sugar.
This must be an exciting moment in their lives.
Well, this is the big event, John. The northern trader here is now measuring his salt, 3 buckets of salt against 2 buckets of rice, or 3 buckets of salt against 1 bucket of sugar. The two officials from north and the south keep a good record. The northern traders took occasion to wash their hair. I've called this fellow Samson. He was from the north. He wasn't much of a trader, but he was a real good juggler of dice. And so they brought him along because every year they had competition. And they sit around in between trading sessions and really throw these bones. I could never figure out what they were doing, but they were all having a good time, especially after they had a keg of fermented rice juice, which seemed to be their favorite drink up there. One fellow would throw the dice, the other would cut the deck or raise the cup. And here's Samson warming up the dice. Almost the best dice thrower in the mountains. He could have been good in Las Vegas or any of of the gambling joints of Europe.
Excuse me, Doctor, this is one of the few signs of money we see in the...
One other event when they exchange money. But actually, Samson wasn't the best dice thrower. That little fellow on the left is the best little warmer of dice in the whole Himalayas. He's the Lama's son. And they wouldn't let him play with the grown-ups because they were afraid he'd be a juvenile delinquent. Now it comes the time for shearing. They've done all the other trading. Now the southern traders will shear the sheep of the northerners. They said, well, once the rest of the trading is done, when we take off the wool, they can't put it back on if they don't like the price. And here is a haphazardly shorn sheep. They're really embarrassed. But as soon as they get the wool, John, they're busy once again. It's the women folk who start out. They cart the wool, and then daily they will be spinning it as they go ahead with their tasks. Always are working hard, spinning while they're watching over their babies or while they're walking down the trails. Even the little boys in between school sessions. Even the little, very tiny little kids. 3-year-old little kid here has learned how to spin, and they make their own clothing too. Well, the problem of taxes is the same throughout the world, John. You can't get away from it. The tax collector now comes up to ask for the taxes, and this is why they carry money with them. The trader on the left pretends he hasn't heard about it, and he goes on carving a mouthpiece for his hookah. He has actually hid some goats round the next sledge. The tax collector knows this. The tax is predicated on number of goats, equivalent of 1 cent per goat and 5 cents per healthy yak. Now they argue whether there should be goat deductions, whether the yak are healthy. They bargain. Well, eventually they compromised, and he paid equivalent of $2.17 in Indian currency. That's the hard currency in the mountains.
No matter where you are, the tax collector gets his.
He gets his share, and he won't take goats or loaded dice or surplus of unmarried daughters as tax. You've got to pay in money. When the tax collecting is over and the trade is finished, then they gather together, the northerners and the southerners, for a big feast. The southerners do the entertaining. The head of the southerners is playing the harmonium. The weird chant, they sing it until the dawn hours. They have a small violin, 2 strings, and the bows right in between the 2 strings. And then the goat knife. This is the one act of sacrifice that they have in this whole community. They sacrifice a goat once a year. They eat vegetables most of the time, or grains. Because the goat is so valuable, they do not wish to use it for food. But this one time in the year, they barbecue one animal in honor of the goats. And so all of the villagers gather. It's now getting late in August. In the beginning of September, they will usually leave. It's different from year to year, but this is about the late part of August. All of them have a bit of the goat meat. Before they go, they place the horns of the goat as a shrine so that the snows will cover it and stay there during the year. The drummer gives the signal. The goats are brought from the crags of the mountains. The people start their southern journey, and thus ends another epic journey in the life of these people.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hagopian, for our first trip to Tibet. It's nice to be down out of the clouds and back at sea level again. Your narrowest escape, it occurs to me, was getting away without marrying the 6-year-old child bride. Now, was this man serious?
Well, probably not, because he knew that I couldn't take his daughter out of the hills, but he thought he'd get in a little dowry on the side.
A dowry? Now, that's another thing. They have a little different way of doing things over there. I thought the dowry came with the bride, and in this case, he wanted you to supply the dowry. Why was that?
Well, usually the dowry is with the women, but up in Tibet, in the Himalayas, girls are rather scarce.
Ah.
So the man has to provide the dowry.
Now it makes sense. Well, you didn't come back with a wife. What did you bring back?
Well, I brought back something which I cherish very much. It's sheep horn from the northern traders. They brought it down from inner Tibet.
Mm-hmm. Well, may I see that? Oh, it's certainly very heavy, isn't it? Well, it's certainly a beauty. And does this have any commercial value for them?
No commercial value, except little religious significance because they value it so highly.
I see. Well, here you were, an American in a very strange country. You weren't able to communicate with them in any way, were you? You had no interpreters.
Oh, yes, I communicated.
I was going to say, how did you get to understand each other?
Well, I did not know a word of Tibetan. Mm-hmm. That was their home language. They knew some Hindustani, and I knew a little Hindustani. So we conversed in a foreign language to both of us.
So you did have a common ground,
Yes.
so to speak. Well, these people ask some pretty naive questions of you. For instance, do you own a hookah back in the United States? How many hookahs do you have? And also, how many goats do you own? Now, does this mean that they're rather provincial people? How much do they know of the outside world?
They're not provincial, John, and these questions are not as naive. They didn't know what type of smoking apparatus we had, so they were very much interested, curious. They know little about the outside world, except that there are countries like Germany, England, Russia, and China, but they did not know that America existed. And here I had an interesting conversation with them one time. I tried to explain that we were about 8,000 miles away. They couldn't quite figure that one out until I told them it would take about 110 days marching with a herd of goats. And then they said, well, that's a far country.
Now, that they could understand, and well, I'll have to remember that, so I'll measure things in terms of goat miles. Well, time, it seems to me, has literally stood still for these people. If you'd gone back there, say, centuries ago, things hadn't changed any from the way they do things today, have they?
I think that's true. Probably if you went back there 300-400 years ago, they'd be living in the same fashion. These mountains are hard to get into, John. The trails are narrow, and so they're rather isolated in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, we met some interesting people, though, en route. Let's see, there was the tax collector, there was Samson, the gambler, the little boy, and the postman who edited your mail.
And the teacher.
And the teacher, of course. So what kind of people are they?
I would say they're gregarious, they're fun-loving, rather optimistic people with a terrific sense of humor.
Dr. Hagopian, not only did you meet some very colorful people, but you also had a very wonderful adventure. And this has been a most unusual journey for all of us. You lived it for 4 months, and we've relived it tonight with you in a half hour. Thank you very much, and good luck, Dr. Michael Hagopian.
Thank you, John.
Another intriguing adventure is in store for us next week. It's a good one, and I hope you'll share it with us next week at the same time. Until then, John Stephenson saying thank you and good night.